Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the absolute most fascinating political battlegrounds in recent memory. I'm talking about the August 4th, 2026 Michigan Democratic Senate primary. Now, I am really thrilled to guide you through this because this race, it's not just about a single Senate seat. It is literally a high-stakes proxy battle for the entire future of the Democratic Party. We're going to break down the candidates, the intense spending, and the competing political philosophies, all using the hard data to see exactly what's happening on the ground. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the primary itself. Second, the two competing party visions. Third, the progressive platform. Fourth, the massive role of big money. And finally, the electoral math.
All right, part one, the Michigan Senate primary.
So meet the guy who's really driving the disruption in this race, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. He's a progressive insurgent, a physician, and an epidemiologist, and he's currently facing off against the deeply entrenched Democratic establishment in what has become an incredibly contentious showdown. He wasn't bred in some political laboratory. He started out as a medical student at Columbia, then became a Rhodes Scholar over at Oxford. From there, he stepped into public service as the health director for Wayne County, Michigan. And it was actually during that time that he had this profound realization. Basically, he concluded that it was our broken politics that was making people sick. That realization is what pushed him into the political arena, leading to a 2018 gubernatorial run and now his 2026 Senate candidacy. I mean, the guy quite literally wrote the book on healthcare. It's titled Medicare for All, A Citizen's Guide. Moving right along to Section 2, the two-party visions. This specific primary is just a fascinating lens into the broader ideological tug-of-war happening within the Democratic Party right now. The contrast between these two couldn't be starker. On one side, you have Haley Stevens. She's a four-term congresswoman, firmly rooted in the moderate wing of the party. She even served as chief of staff to President Obama's auto task force during the whole GM and Chrysler rescue. So unsurprisingly, she presents herself as a safe, bipartisan bet, and she's heavily backed by establishment heavyweights like Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and retiring Senator Gary Peters. But then, on the flip side, we have Abdul El-Sayed. He completely represents the progressive insurgent wing. He's got endorsements from high-profile figures like Senator Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. So as you can see, this really isn't just a choice between two people. It's a fundamental choice between two entirely different visions for how the party should operate and ultimately how they think they can win. Which brings us to Section 3, the progressive platform. Now, to really grasp why this primary is so incredibly energized, we have to look at what El-Sayed is actually promising. First and foremost, Medicare for All, which, as we just talked about, is a policy he built his entire public health career advocating for. Then we see some major economic and structural reforms, taxing billionaires, abolishing ICE, and a strict pledge to reject all corporate PAC money. But I want you to focus on that final point for a second, ending U.S. military aid to Israel. This stance is generating massive friction nationwide, but locally, it resonates deeply. And why is that? Because Michigan is home to the largest Arab American population in the United States. So this whole platform is precision-built to fire up a very specific, highly motivated grassroots base. And honestly, this next point brilliantly illustrates why policies like Medicare for All aren't just, abstract talking points for voters. They are deeply, deeply personal. Listen to this quote from Les Lucas, who is an uninsured Michigan Democrat. He says, "We can barely afford groceries and gas. I have to make sacrifices, and healthcare is one of them." When El-Sayed campaigns on this platform, he is directly targeting the daily, tangible struggles of everyday people who just feel totally left behind by the status quo. To tie that all together, the campaign uses this brilliantly simple, super catchy rallying cry: money out of politics, money in your pockets. He is deliberately linking his absolute refusal to take corporate PAC money directly to his economic message. Basically, he's telling voters, look, the reason you are struggling financially is exactly because politicians are being bought by corporate interests. Let's move on to Section 4, the role of big money. Okay, the crucial point of this entire race really boils down to this absolutely massive, record-breaking figure: over $30 million. Just to put that into perspective for a second, that is enough money to fund an entire major Hollywood indie film. And it was all poured into supporting Haley Stevens by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, better known as AIPAC, and its affiliated super PAC. It is quite literally the largest investment that organization has ever made in a single electoral contest, and it has completely turned campaign finance into the central defining issue of the entire race. So, how do the candidates actually handle this explosive issue? Well, we've mapped out both of their perspectives impartially. Stevens' defense is strongly rooted in her constituency. She points out that she is incredibly proud to represent one of the largest Jewish populations in a congressional district in the whole country, and she really emphasizes her support for long-term peace and a two-state solution. Plus, she argues that she fundamentally doesn't control outside PAC spending. Conversely, El-Sayed's argument is that this massive spending is a catastrophic symptom of a totally broken system. He frames the entire race as a referendum, basically asking, can grassroots organizing actually overcome tens of millions of dollars in corporate and outside contributions? He argues that beating big money here would deal a massive blow to corporate influence in Democratic politics nationwide. And heading into the final weekend, it really looks like El-Sayed's message is hitting home. He managed to secure a double-digit lead in the polls at 54.8%, compared to Stevens at 45.2%. This anti-establishment, anti-big money messaging has successfully energized a coalition large enough to seriously threaten one of the most well-funded moderate campaigns in the entire country. All right, the final piece of the puzzle, Section 5, the electoral math. Now, we really have to zoom out to the macro view, because winning the primary is only half the battle, right? The strategic calculus of general election electability is what really keeps party leaders awake at night. And grounding this whole electability debate is one crucial fact. In 2024, Michigan went to Donald Trump by 1.4 percentage points, and he also won it in 2016. So Michigan is this fierce, completely unforgiving battleground state. The core question splitting the party right now is whether a progressive insurgent can actually win over enough independent and swing voters in a state that has very recently leaned red. The establishment will often argue that moderates are just safer in swing states. However, if you look at the head-to-head polling against the Republican nominee, former Congressman Mike Rogers, it paints a really surprising picture. In a matchup of Stevens versus Rogers, Stevens holds a very, very narrow lead of 45.5% to 44.7%. But then look at the El-Sayed matchup. El-Sayed leads Rogers 49.0% to 38.7%. That is a significantly wider margin. Progressives look at this data and argue, hey, voters aren't looking for a safe moderate. They are hungry for systemic change, and a bold progressive platform actually draws way more voters to the polls than a centrist one. To really make sense of those numbers, we turn to expert analysis. Check out this insight from Matt Grossman over at Michigan State University. He notes that voters are united more by frustration with Democratic leadership than by agreement on every policy question. This is absolutely vital to understand. El-Sayed's momentum might not just be about everyone suddenly wanting to abolish ICE or loving every single detail of Medicare for all. Instead, it likely represents a much broader political realignment that is completely driven by profound voter frustration with the status quo. He is successfully capturing that anti-establishment energy. Which brings us to the ultimate stakes. Why does this single primary in Michigan matter so much to someone watching in California or Texas or New York? Well, Democrats literally must net 4 seats to retake the Senate majority, control of the upper chamber of Congress, and the ability to actually pass legislation or confirm judges could very well hinge entirely on whoever wins this specific race in November against Mike Rogers. So we're going to end this explainer with one overarching, pretty provocative question. Can a progressive actually win a battleground state? The Michigan primary is the ultimate testing ground for this. Is the future of the Democratic Party totally reliant on well-funded, moderate establishment figures, or is it going to be driven by grassroots, progressive insurgents demanding structural change? The data tells us the voters are super engaged, the money is historic, and the tension is at an absolute boiling point. The results of this primary are going to give us our answer. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this wild race, and definitely keep your eyes on the data.